So this is Matthew chapter 1, the scripture for the 24th of July. We're starting our third gospel, and our final gospel, John, will take place toward the end of the year, I believe in December. So the Gospel of Matthew was thought to be written by the disciple of Jesus who was called Matthew or Levi. This disciple was a tax collector before Jesus came and reached out to him. And it's so neat to see in Jesus' set of disciples that Jesus can have a zealot on the one hand who was for the overthrow of Rome, burn it all down, and also a party man in Matthew, who's a tax collector, an agent of Rome. And these two people Jesus could have in the same group. I think that speaks to who our Messiah is. So Matthew was likely written to a Jewish audience. There are a number of Jewish figures of speech and Jewish Old Testament references. Matthew, every time he's about to introduce an Old Testament reference, he'll say, as it was written in the prophet, or as the prophet Isaiah said, or something like that. And this happens a ton of times in Matthew. Now, the gospel discusses tradition and the role of tradition in the life of the Christian, but it also is centered around 5 discourses. And you'll find this in Matthew 5 through 7, that's the Sermon on the Mount. Matthew 10, that's where the disciples are commissioned. Matthew 13, which is the introduction to the parables and statements about the kingdom of heaven. You got Matthew 18, which is a description of relationships in the church or in the holy community. And finally, Matthew 23 through 25, which is just a strident condemnation of the religious leaders. And it's an apocalyptic vision of what the kingdom of heaven will look like. So Matthew's a careful writer, and he does not tell his story by accident. And in this first chapter, although it's a long genealogy for the most part, it's not put together by accident. Matthew offers Jesus' lineage, but does so in a very specific way. He does it a little differently than Luke does. Back in Luke 3, when we were looking at Jesus' lineage, Luke marched from Jesus all the way back to Adam. Matthew starts at Abraham and marches up to Jesus and punctuates his list at certain points. His list is separated into 3 groups of 14 each. So the first group of 14 goes from Abraham to David. The next group of 14 is David to the exile. And then the final group of 14 is from exile to Messiah. And this is really important because by structuring it in 3 groups of 14, 14 is 2 times 7. 7 is sort of a number of completion for the Jews at this point. And if you've got 3 sets of 14, that's 6 sets of 7. And that means that Jesus is sort of the inaugural person to begin the 7th set of 7s. That means that Jesus is ushering in a completion of the promises that God gave to Abraham. And Matthew, just in how he structures his genealogy, is beginning to share this with his readers, which is just incredible. We also see women mentioned in Jesus' genealogy, which was not done at this point in time. The women Tamar and Rahab, Ruth and Bathsheba, who's not mentioned by name, but she's the wife of Uriah that's mentioned, and then Mary. All of these women did remarkable things, some of which were very good and others of which were not. But they're worth naming because they played a role in bringing Jesus, bringing the Messiah into the world. Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law. Judah, one of the tribes of Israel, one of the sons of Jacob. Tamar was Judah's daughter-in-law before having a child with him, and you can read about that in Genesis 38. Rahab, as you may remember, was a prostitute in Jericho. You can find that in Joshua 2. Ruth was a Moabitess and a foreigner, and also King David's grandmother. And she's got a whole book of the Bible named after her. Bathsheba, the wife of Uriah, was taken by King David, who then had Uriah killed. And that story is told in 2 Samuel 11 through 12. And then finally, Mary, the mother of Jesus, whose unwed pregnancy would have caused a scandal. She was definitely instrumental in bringing Jesus on the scene. Now, Matthew is also the only gospel writer to deal with Joseph and how he was feeling when Mary was pregnant with Jesus. Joseph the Just is what the early church fathers called Joseph, Mary's husband. He wanted to break off the engagement when he hears that Mary has conceived a child, but he trusts God's messenger who prompted him to go through with the marriage. by stepping outside of his comfort zone and exposing himself likely to criticism and ridicule in his hometown, by continuing in his engagement to a woman who either is pregnant with his kid before they get married or went outside of their future marriage to get pregnant. That must have been a huge deal for him. It was way outside his comfort zone. But by doing this, he was able to behold God incarnate, Emmanuel. I wonder, when have you perceived God outside of your comfort zone? That's all for Matthew chapter 1. On Monday, the 27th, we'll look at Matthew chapter 2. May God bless you in your reading of Scripture.